Imagine, for a moment, the final brutal weeks of World War II in Europe. The stench of gunpowder still hung heavy in the air, the ground churned by tanks, the future utterly uncertain. A German soldier, perhaps a young man from Bavaria, exhausted and defeated, finally laid down his rifle. Captured by American forces in the spring of 1945, he expected the harsh realities of a prisoner of war camp. Meager rations, cold barracks, the bitter taste of defeat. He anticipated propaganda, re-education, perhaps even hostility. But what he received, what truly shattered his understanding of the conflict, was something entirely different, something almost absurd in its implications. It wasn't a myth, a whispered rumor. It was a physical, undeniable reality. This veteran, who had fought for the Third Reich's supposed industrial might, was handed a bottle of his own country's finest beer, imported, chilled, and served by the very enemy he had sworn to destroy. This wasn't merely a tactical advantage, it was a conceptual one, altering the very perception of power and inevitability. In the next 40 minutes, you'll discover exactly how this extraordinary chapter unfolded, and why it still fundamentally shapes our understanding of strategic influence today. This wasn't a random act of generosity, nor was it an isolated incident. Instead, it was a carefully calculated move, a nuanced layer of psychological operations, often overshadowed by the roar of cannons and the clash of armor. The Allies understood that total war wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was waged in the minds of men, in the very fabric of their beliefs. By late 1944, as the Western Front pushed deeper into German territory, the sheer volume of captured enemy soldiers became a logistical challenge of unprecedented scale. Thousands upon thousands of Wehrmacht, Waffen-SS, and Luftwaffe personnel were pouring into temporary enclosures like the Rheinwiesenlager, vast open-air camps along the Rhine, sometimes holding over 100,000 men. The conventional wisdom dictated strict adherence to the Geneva Conventions for their basic welfare. But the U.S. Army, under commanders like General Omar Bradley, saw an opportunity beyond mere containment. The strategy began not with a grand declaration, but with a series of quiet directives from SHEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, to intelligence and supply units. The goal was to dismantle the enemy's will to resist, not just militarily, but ideologically. Nazi propaganda, spearheaded by figures like Joseph Goebbels, had for years hammered home the narrative of German industrial superiority, the efficiency of their economy, and the purity of their national identity. To undermine this, the Allies needed to demonstrate an overwhelming, almost effortless command over resources, even those considered uniquely German. This required an intricate supply chain, a procurement strategy that stretched far beyond the battlefield, reaching into surprising corners. The decision to procure specific items, including German-made goods, was a subtle yet devastating psychological weapon. Consider the American Quartermaster Corps, a logistical backbone often unsung, but here, operating with surgical precision. They weren't just supplying K-rations and bullets. They were tasked with sourcing commodities that would deliver a specific message. Reports from the Military Intelligence Service, analyzing prisoner interrogations from 1943 onwards, highlighted the deep-seated pride many German soldiers held in their national products. This wasn't about comfort. It was about a profound cultural challenge. The question wasn't if they could get German beer, but how it would be presented, to maximize its impact, creating a cognitive dissonance that would be impossible to ignore. This logistical marvel involved an extensive network. While some German breweries had been captured intact or were operating under Allied control, like those in the Ruhr Valley after its liberation in March 1945, a significant portion of this imported German beer actually came from neutral countries, like Switzerland, or even from breweries in Allied-occupied territories that had been producing for German markets before the war. The sheer audacity of this operation, routing German-made goods through Allied lines, then back to German prisoners, speaks volumes about the strategic thinking at play. It wasn't just beer, it was a carefully curated symbol of dominance. How could a nation that claimed industrial and economic supremacy be so thoroughly outmaneuvered, even in the production and distribution of its own iconic beverages? What would you have prioritized in that moment as an Allied strategist? Basic sustenance, or a subtle psychological blow that might hasten the end of the conflict? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective truly shapes how we understand these complex decisions. This systemic impact of such seemingly minor acts rippled through the prisoner population, contributing to a profound erosion of morale and ideological conviction. For men who had spent years fighting for a cause built on the premise of German superiority, this tangible demonstration of Allied economic reach was a visceral blow, far more effective than any leaflet drop. Imagine the scene: a soldier, perhaps from the 11th Panzer Division, battered and bewildered, looking at the familiar label of a Dortmunder Union or a Spatenbrei. His world, built on narratives of German industrial might and unshakable national identity, crumbled with each sip. The sheer audacity of the gesture. The enemy, capable of not only defeating them in battle, but also of casually procuring and distributing their own cherished national products, created a profound cognitive dissonance. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about an overwhelming assertion of power, a quiet, devastating proof of total Allied dominance. The strategic brilliance lay in understanding the psychological terrain. Nazi propaganda, refined over a decade, had meticulously crafted an image of German self-sufficiency, a Volksgemeinschaft, a people's community, united by shared struggle and superior output. Figures like Albert Speer had famously orchestrated the German war economy, projecting an image of efficiency even as the Allied bombing campaigns intensified. To then have the enemy casually produce German beer, often sourced from breweries now under their control, or even imported through neutral channels, utterly dismantled this carefully constructed illusion. It wasn't just that the Americans had the beer, it was that they had the means to acquire it, transport it across a continent ravaged by war, and then serve it as a matter of routine. This spoke to an infrastructure, a logistical prowess, and an economic resilience that directly contradicted every tenet of Goebbels' messaging. Consider the context of the camps themselves. Many German POWs in the final months of the war were held in vast, often hastily constructed enclosures like the Rhein-Wiesenlager, which by May 1945 held over 1.8 million prisoners. Conditions, while adhering to Geneva Convention basics, were austere. The sudden appearance of a familiar, high-quality German product, distributed systematically, stood in stark contrast to the expected deprivations. This wasn't a one-off bribe, it was part of a broader, deliberate strategy. The U.S. Army's Prisoner of War Information Bureau and various intelligence units meticulously observed and documented the reactions. Reports from the 12th Army Group, overseeing many such camps in Western Europe, frequently noted the astonishment and confusion among the captured Wehrmacht soldiers. The procurement process itself was a marvel of wartime logistics. While some beer came from breweries like those around Dortmund or Munich that fell under Allied occupation in early 1945, a significant portion was indeed imported. This often meant buying through intermediaries in neutral Switzerland or Sweden, or even diverting existing stocks from Allied-occupied territories that had previously supplied German markets. The Quartermaster Corps, typically focused on K-rations and fuel, now engaged in a covert cultural procurement operation. It wasn't about the volume, but the symbolism. Each bottle represented a thread of control, a subtle unraveling of the enemy's mental fortitude. The question wasn't if the Allies could do it, but how they managed to make it appear so effortless, so utterly beyond the capabilities of the very nation that prided itself on such things. This meticulous planning and execution showcased a deeper understanding of psychological warfare than simply dropping propaganda leaflets. It was a tangible, undeniable proof of Allied economic and logistical supremacy, a direct challenge to the very identity of the German soldier. For men who had been told they were part of an invincible Reich destined to dominate Europe, this act of benign, almost casual, conquest of their own cultural products was devastating. How could a nation so utterly outmaneuver them, even in the production and distribution of their own iconic beverages? This went beyond military defeat. It was a profound cultural and ideological dismantling designed to foster a widespread disillusionment that would resonate far beyond the war's end. This psychological dismantling wasn't a theoretical exercise. Its effects were immediate and observable. Within the vast, temporary enclosures like those at Andernach or Remagen, where hundreds of thousands of German prisoners were processed in the spring of 1945, the reaction to these imported beers was a phenomenon noted by Allied intelligence officers. Imagine the scene. A young Lanzer, perhaps from the 6th Parachute Division, his uniform threadbare, his spirit broken, accepting a bottle from an American MP. He might have expected water, perhaps stale bread. Instead, he saw the familiar crest of a brewery from his homeland, a taste of home delivered by the very hands that had defeated him. The initial bewilderment quickly gave way to a deeper, more unsettling realization. Reports from the U.S. Army's Psychological Warfare Division, particularly those compiled by analysts attached to the 12th Army Group in May and June of 1945, documented a consistent pattern: shock followed by a profound questioning. These weren't mere luxuries. They were instruments of ideological erosion. For years, Nazi propaganda had fueled a belief in German invincibility, in the efficiency of their blitzkrieg and the self-sufficiency of their Volksgemeinschaft. To see the enemy not only defeat their armies but also effortlessly command their own cultural symbols, even their beer, was a direct assault on this carefully constructed worldview. It wasn't just physical defeat, it was a conceptual surrender. The logistical genius of this operation extended beyond mere procurement. It was about presentation. The beer wasn't simply dumped in piles. It was distributed in an organized, almost casual manner, alongside regular rations, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for the victorious Allies to provide German products to their vanquished foes. This nonchalance amplified the message. It implied an overwhelming abundance, a total control over resources that dwarfed anything the Third Reich had ever managed to project. This wasn't a desperate attempt to buy loyalty. It was a demonstration of a power so absolute it could afford such gestures. This strategy dovetailed perfectly with broader Allied re-education efforts, particularly those spearheaded by the Information Control Division. While direct political indoctrination would come later, these subtle acts laid the groundwork by shattering preconceived notions. How could Germany claim industrial superiority when its own iconic products were being supplied by the inferior enemy? How could their leaders have promised victory when the victors demonstrated such effortless command over the very symbols of German identity? The contradiction was stark, undeniable, and deeply personal for each man who held that bottle. Consider the specific units involved. The U.S. Army's Quartermaster Corps, typically focused on delivering combat supplies, now engaged in what amounted to cultural warfare. They utilized captured supply depots, negotiated with breweries in Allied occupied zones, and even established temporary distribution networks within the sprawling POW camps. This wasn't an ad hoc decision. It was a directive from the highest levels, reflecting a sophisticated understanding that the war would not truly end until the enemy's ideology was thoroughly discredited. The goal was to accelerate the Entnazifizierung process, the denazification of German society, by undermining its foundations from within the prisoner population. The psychological impact was multi-layered. First, it created a sense of cognitive dissonance. The enemy, portrayed as barbaric and uncultured, was capable of providing a familiar comfort with an ease that belied the chaos of war. Second, it demonstrated an unprecedented level of logistical capability, subtly suggesting that the Allies' reach was limitless, their resources inexhaustible. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it offered a tangible, undeniable proof that the Nazi narrative of German strength and self-reliance was a lie. These simple acts, such as offering a bottle of Dortmunder beer, became potent symbols of overwhelming power. The men, stripped of their weapons and their former beliefs, were left to grapple with a reality far more complex and humiliating than simple military defeat. This wasn't merely about quenching thirst. It was about pouring a cold, hard truth directly into the minds of the defeated. The sheer scale of the operation, providing such specific items to hundreds of thousands of prisoners, demanded immense coordination. It wasn't just a few bottles here and there. It was a systematic, sustained effort across multiple camps. From the vast Rhine meadow camps like Bretzenheim, which housed over 100,000 men, to smaller, more permanent facilities. Each delivery, each familiar label chipped away at the carefully constructed edifice of Nazi propaganda. It forced a re-evaluation, not just of the war's outcome, but of the very core beliefs that had driven them to fight. But what deeper, more insidious message was truly being conveyed beyond mere economic superiority? O insidious message não era apenas sobre superioridade econômica. Era sobre a total irrelevância da luta alemã diante de poder aliado tão avassalador, quase casual. Por anos, a Wehrmacht havia sido informada de que estava travando uma guerra de sobrevivência contra um inimigo inferior e decadente. No entanto, lá estava esse inimigo, não apenas os derrotando no campo de batalha, mas demonstrando sem esforço um alcance logístico e econômico que parecia ilimitado. Isso não era meramente uma vantagem tática, era uma vantagem conceitual, alterando a própria percepção de poder e inevitabilidade, desmantelando os fundamentos da propaganda nazista tijolo por tijolo. Esse nível de guerra psicológica, muitas vezes negligenciado, era tão crucial quanto qualquer divisão de tanques ou ataque aéreo. O comando aliado compreendia que a vitória significava mais do que apenas ocupar território. Significava conquistar as mentes dos derrotados. O próprio general Dwight D. Eisenhower, como comandante supremo aliado, enfatizou a importância da estabilização pós-conflito e a necessidade de quebrar o domínio ideológico do nazismo. Em maio de 1945, com a rendição incondicional da Alemanha, o foco mudou drasticamente. Os milhões de soldados alemães, agora detidos como prisioneiros de guerra, representavam uma oportunidade única, uma audiência cativa para uma reeducação sutil, mais profunda. A cerveja, nesse contexto, não era um agrado, era um cavalo de Troia para uma nova realidade. Considere o contraste. Esses homens haviam suportado anos de racionamento, de produtos ersatz, substitutos para tudo, de café a combustível. Tudo sob a bandeira do sacrifício nacional por um Reich maior. Agora, seus captores, o suposto inimigo, não apenas estavam bem alimentados, mas podiam casualmente fornecer produtos alemães genuínos, muitas vezes superiores ao que os civis na Alemanha recebiam há anos. Essa realidade nua e crua, trazida à tona com cada rótulo familiar, contradizia diretamente a narrativa de uma Alemanha autossuficiente e conquistadora. Ela expunha a mentira de que o Terceiro Reich possuía um motor econômico capaz de sustentar um conflito global prolongado, especialmente contra o poder combinado dos aliados ocidentais e da União Soviética. A divisão de controle de informações do Exército dos Estados Unidos, trabalhando em conjunto com a inteligência militar, curou meticulosamente essas experiências. Embora sua missão principal fosse estabelecer uma imprensa livre na Alemanha ocupada, sua influência se estendia aos campos de prisioneiros de guerra, moldando sutilmente o ambiente. Eles entendiam que um soldado derrotado, despojado de sua armadura ideológica, era muito mais receptivo a novas ideias. A cerveja servia como uma peça potente e não verbal desse controle de informações. Não se tratava de dizer-lhes que o nazismo estava errado. Tratava-se de mostrar-lhes, por meio de provas tangíveis, que suas promessas eram vazias. Essa abordagem sistemática às operações psicológicas não foi desenvolvida da noite para o dia. Lições foram aprendidas em campanhas anteriores, particularmente na Itália e no norte da África, onde as forças aliadas encontraram pela primeira vez um grande número de prisioneiros do eixo. Relatórios iniciais indicaram que simples demonstrações de abundância americana e eficiência logística tiveram um impacto desproporcional na moral do inimigo. No final de 1944, esses insights foram codificados em doutrina, levando a diretrizes específicas sobre a gestão de prisioneiros e mensagens culturais. O objetivo não era apenas deter prisioneiros, mas iniciar o processo de desnazificação mesmo antes de serem repatriados. Pense na infraestrutura logística necessária para realizar isso. Não se tratava apenas de encontrar uma cervejaria. Tratava-se de garantir que a cerveja chegasse em boas condições, em quantidades suficientes e no momento psicológico certo. O corpo de intendência americano, já sobrecarregado fornecendo exércitos por toda a Europa, conseguiu integrar essa cadeia de suprimentos complexa e não essencial em suas operações. Isso demonstrou um nível de capacidade organizacional que era simplesmente inconcebível para os soldados alemães, cujas próprias linhas de suprimento estavam desmoronando sob a incessante superioridade aérea aliada desde 1943. A escolha deliberada de cerveja alemã foi fundamental. Se fosse cerveja americana, teria sido uma mera curiosidade, talvez um símbolo de luxo aliado. Mas o rótulo alemão familiar, o sabor de casa, transformou-a em algo muito mais profundo. Tornou-se um espelho refletindo o verdadeiro estado de sua nação, conquistada, suas indústrias destruídas ou agora sob controle inimigo, seu orgulho diminuído. Não se tratava de infligir dor física. Tratava-se de uma forma muito mais eficaz e insidiosa de desarmamento psicológico. A natureza simplesmente sem esforço do ato era sua arma mais potente. Essa estratégia matizada se estendeu a outros aspectos do tratamento de prisioneiros. Embora as provisões básicas fossem garantidas pelo direito internacional, os aliados frequentemente forneciam pequenos confortos inesperados, cuidadosamente escolhidos por seu peso simbólico. Esses não eram atos aleatórios de bondade, eram gestos calculados, projetados para destacar o vasto abismo entre a retórica nazista e a realidade aliada. Isso fomentou um sentimento de desilusão que tornou os esforços de reeducação na Alemanha pós-guerra mais receptivos, pois a dura realidade do poder aliado já havia começado a desmantelar os fundamentos da propaganda nazista. A questão não era se essas táticas funcionavam, mas quão profundamente elas remodelaram a própria identidade de uma geração derrotada. Que crise mais profunda, quase existencial, esse ato aparentemente benevolente desencadeou nas mentes dos soldados alemães. A crise mais profunda, a quase existencial, que esse ato aparentemente benevolente desencadeou, não estava na derrota física, mas na aniquilação do próprio sentido da sua luta. Para um soldado alemão, a guerra não era apenas uma série de batalhas, era uma cruzada ideológica, uma defesa da sua Weltanschauung, a sua visão de mundo, contra forças inferiores. Eles haviam sido doutrinados com a crença na superioridade ariana, na invencibilidade da máquina de guerra alemã e na autossuficiência de um Reich milenar. Ver seu inimigo, o suposto decadente e materialista amigo, não apenas os derrotar, mas casualmente dispensar símbolos da sua própria identidade cultural com uma aparente facilidade, era um ataque direto a essa fundação ideológica. Isso gerou uma dissonância cognitiva esmagadora. Se os americanos podiam, sem esforço, fornecer cerveja alemã de alta qualidade, que eles próprios haviam lutado para obter durante anos de racionamento e escassez, o que isso dizia sobre a promessa de prosperidade e poder do Terceiro Reich? Significava que tudo o que lhes havia sido prometido era uma mentira. A superioridade industrial alemã era uma ilusão. A invencibilidade do Volk era uma farsa. Não era apenas uma questão de quem ganhava a guerra, mas de quem havia vencido a verdade. Esse desmantelamento conceitual foi, para muitos, mais devastador do que a perda de qualquer batalha. Os oficiais de inteligência aliados, especialmente aqueles do Psychological Warfare Division, PWD, compreendiam profundamente essa dinâmica. Eles não estavam apenas coletando informações, estavam observando a erosão da psique inimiga em tempo real. Relatórios de interrogatório de prisioneiros de guerra, compilados em campos como o de Bad Kreuznach, em meados de 1945, revelaram um padrão consistente: a inicial descrença, seguida por uma raiva silenciosa, e, finalmente, uma resignação que beirava o desespero. Não era a raiva da derrota militar, mas a amargura de ter sido traído por uma ideologia que exigia sacrifícios extremos em troca de promessas vazias. Essa estratégia não se limitava à cerveja. A disponibilidade de cigarros americanos, chocolate e até revistas, todos exibindo uma abundância inimaginável para o alemão médio sob o racionamento de guerra, serviu para reforçar a mesma mensagem. Mas a cerveja alemã tinha um peso cultural único. Era um símbolo de lar, de celebração, de uma identidade nacional que os nazistas haviam cooptado e pervertido. Ao devolvê-la de forma tão casual, os aliados estavam, de fato, reapropriando um pedaço da cultura alemã, demonstrando que eles, os vitoriosos, agora controlavam não apenas o território, mas também os símbolos mais íntimos da nação derrotada. A magnitude dessa operação logística, a capacidade de desviar recursos de uma máquina de guerra global para tal guerra cultural, é um testemunho da sofisticação estratégica aliada. O Quartermaster Corps não estava apenas atendendo às necessidades básicas dos prisioneiros sob a Convenção de Genebra. Eles estavam executando uma diretriz de guerra psicológica que visava a desnazificação de milhões de mentes. Esta não era uma tática improvisada. Era o culminar de anos de pesquisa e observação sobre como as operações psicológicas poderiam ser mais eficazes do que a força bruta. A visão era clara. Para construir uma Alemanha pós-guerra estável e democrática, era preciso primeiro desmantelar a crença no nazismo. E a maneira mais eficaz de fazer isso não era com panfletos ou sermões, mas com a verdade. A realidade do poder aliado já havia começado a desmantelar os alicerces da propaganda nazista, tijolo por tijolo. Mas como essa guerra cultural se traduziu em mudanças concretas na doutrina militar e na estratégia de ocupação dos aliados, e por que a lição ainda ecoa hoje? A tradução dessa guerra cultural em mudanças concretas na doutrina militar e na estratégia de ocupação aliada foi imediata e profunda. Os insights obtidos ao observar as reações dos prisioneiros, particularmente a atos como a distribuição de cerveja alemã, não se desvaneceram com a fumaça da batalha. Em vez disso, tornaram-se pilares fundamentais para as políticas de ocupação que moldariam a Alemanha pós-guerra por décadas. A visão do general Eisenhower para uma Europa estável e democrática dependia não apenas da vitória militar, mas de uma completa transformação ideológica. Isso significava entender a mentalidade do inimigo, não apenas seus movimentos de tropas. A Divisão de Guerra Psicológica do Exército dos Estados Unidos, tendo documentado meticulosamente a dissonância cognitiva criada por esses atos aparentemente menores, começou a codificar essas observações em doutrina formal. Relatórios de unidades que operavam os vastos campos de Hein-Wiesenlegger, por exemplo, forneceram evidências tangíveis de que demonstrar a abundância aliada e a superioridade logística tinham um impacto muito maior na moral e na convicção ideológica do que as palestras de propaganda direta. Não se tratava de converter soldados individualmente. Tratava-se de corroer sistematicamente os princípios fundamentais da crença nazista de dentro da psique coletiva alemã. No final de 1945, essas descobertas estavam influenciando as diretrizes emitidas para os recém-formados destacamentos do governo militar encarregados de administrar os territórios ocupados. Uma mudança fundamental foi a ênfase na reorientação em vez da simples reeducação. Embora a reeducação frequentemente implicasse doutrinação direta, a reorientação focava em criar um ambiente onde os indivíduos pudessem questionar naturalmente e, em última análise, rejeitar as narrativas que lhes haviam sido contadas. O serviço de cerveja alemã, por exemplo, não era explicitamente propaganda antinazista, mas seu efeito era precisamente esse. Apresentava uma realidade inegável que quebrava o mito da autossuficiência alemã e da eficácia de sua liderança em tempo de guerra. Essa abordagem matizada tornou-se central para programas como os esforços de desnazificação, que visavam purgar a influência nazista da sociedade alemã, não apenas por meios legais, mas mudando corações e mentes. A genialidade estratégica residia em compreender que os símbolos possuíam um poder imenso. O rótulo familiar, em uma garrafa de Dortmunder Union, servida por um soldado americano, tornou-se um potente símbolo do poder aliado avassalador e do alcance econômico. Não se tratava apenas de vencer uma guerra. Tratava-se de vencer a paz, desacreditando os próprios alicerces da ideologia que havia mergulhado o mundo em conflito. Os feitos logísticos necessários para realizar isso, desviando recursos de uma máquina de guerra global para adquirir e distribuir itens culturalmente específicos, sublinharam uma capacidade organizacional que a economia de guerra alemã, apesar de seus sucessos iniciais sob figuras como Speer, nunca conseguiu igualar em seus anos finais. Essa compreensão estratégica estendeu-se à forma como os aliados abordaram as populações civis também. A provisão de alimentos, suprimentos médicos e até os esforços de reconstrução não foram meramente atos humanitários. Foram demonstrações cuidadosamente gerenciadas de um vencedor benevolente, mas esmagadoramente poderoso. Isso contrastava diretamente com a visão nazista de hierarquia racial e conquista brutal. A lição aprendida nos campos de prisioneiros de guerra, que demonstrações tangíveis e inegáveis de capacidade e compreensão cultural poderiam ser mais persuasivas do que qualquer retórica, tornou-se um princípio orientador para toda a ocupação. Isso destacou como a compreensão cultural, mesmo no contexto brutal da guerra, poderia ser aproveitada como uma potente ferramenta de influência. Os ecos de longo prazo dessa estratégia são inegáveis. A desilusão generalizada fomentada por essas operações psicológicas sutis tornou os esforços de reeducação na Alemanha pós-guerra significativamente mais receptivos. Quando os ex-prisioneiros voltaram para casa, muitos carregavam consigo não apenas as cicatrizes da derrota, mas uma reavaliação fundamental das promessas nazistas. Eles haviam visto, em primeira mão, a dura realidade do poder e da abundância aliados, que já havia começado a desmantelar os alicerces da propaganda nazista. Isso contribuiu para o estabelecimento relativamente rápido e bem-sucedido de instituições democráticas na Alemanha Ocidental. Um forte contraste com os desafios enfrentados em outras zonas pós-conflito. O ato de oferecer cerveja não era apenas sobre uma bebida. Era sobre oferecer um vislumbre de um mundo onde o inimigo comandava não apenas exércitos, mas também o próprio tecido cultural dos derrotados. Foi uma vitória conceitual que abriu caminho para uma nova realidade política. Mas como essa abordagem matizada da guerra psicológica evoluiu e o que ela nos diz sobre as dinâmicas de poder ocultas dos conflitos de hoje? A shift from overt, often heavy-handed propaganda to more subtle, insidious psychological conditioning wasn't an accident. Early in the war, Allied psychological operations were often direct, relying on leaflets that urged surrender or presented stark moral choices. Think of the millions of safe conduct. Passes dropped over enemy lines, promising fair treatment if a soldier laid down his arms. While effective to a degree, these methods often met with ingrained resistance, especially among ideologically committed troops. The lesson learned by late 1943, particularly after campaigns in North Africa and Sicily, was that direct persuasion was often less potent than indirect demonstration. This insight led to a reevaluation within the Office of War Information, OWI, and the Psychological Warfare Branch, PWB, which recognized that actions could speak louder and more subtly than words. The beer strategy wasn't just a clever trick, it was the culmination of refined thinking. It represented a move beyond merely demoralizing the enemy to actively delegitimizing their cause and leadership. Instead of telling German soldiers that their leaders lied, the Allies engineered situations where the soldiers themselves would discover that lie through tangible, personal experience. This was psychological judo, using the enemy's own weight and expectations against them. By showcasing a logistical abundance that defied Nazi propaganda, the Allies didn't just win a battle of supplies, they won a battle of perception. Consider the meticulous planning involved. This wasn't about a single shipment of beer. It was about establishing procurement channels, understanding local German tastes, knowing that a specific regional brew might resonate more deeply than a generic one, and integrating this into the massive, complex supply chain of the European theater of operations. The Quartermaster Corps, already responsible for everything from ammunition to rations for millions of troops, had to adapt its vast network to include these seemingly minor, yet strategically vital, cultural provisions. This demonstrated an organizational flexibility and resource depth that was utterly alien to the increasingly desperate Wehrmacht, whose logistics were collapsing under Allied air superiority and relentless ground pressure. This strategic shift marked a pivotal moment in the understanding of total war. It acknowledged that the battlefield extended beyond physical terrain to the psychological landscape of the enemy. The ability to project overwhelming power, not just through firepower, but through economic reach and cultural understanding, became a new frontier of conflict. For the German POWs, the beer wasn't just a comfort, it was a silent, potent argument. It eroded the foundations of their indoctrination, suggesting that the decadent West was in fact more robust, more capable, and ultimately more real than the vision of the Third Reich they had been promised. This was a form of soft power before the term was coined, wielding cultural and economic influence to achieve strategic objectives without direct coercion. The long-term implications of these tactics were profound. They fed directly into the post-war occupation strategies, particularly the ambitious denazification programs. Allied planners understood that simply removing Nazi officials wasn't enough. The underlying ideology had to be addressed at a societal level. The experiences in the POW camps provided a blueprint. Create environments where the stark reality of Allied capabilities and values could slowly dismantle ingrained beliefs. This meant encouraging democratic discourse, exposing truth through verifiable facts, and demonstrating a different path forward, all rooted in the understanding that personal experience was the most powerful counter-narrative to propaganda. The evolution of this psychological warfare continues to resonate in contemporary conflicts. In an age of information warfare and globalized media, the battle for hearts and minds is more critical than ever. Nations still employ sophisticated strategies to influence perceptions, often using cultural artifacts or economic demonstrations to subtly shape narratives. The lesson from the German POWs and their imported beer is that true power isn't just about what you can destroy. It's about what you can provide, what you can represent, and how effectively you can dismantle an adversary's worldview without firing a shot. It's about the conceptual victory that precedes and ultimately secures the physical one. This profound understanding of human psychology, leveraged with logistical genius, remains a cornerstone of modern strategic thinking, revealing the hidden power dynamics that often operate beneath the surface of overt conflict. What then were the most unexpected and enduring lessons that the Allies themselves took from this unique chapter of psychological engagement? Lessons that reshaped their approach to future global challenges. The most unexpected lesson, perhaps, was the profound realization that victory wasn't merely about crushing an enemy's military might, but about dismantling their ideological foundations and rebuilding a new reality. The beer, the cigarettes, the chocolate. These weren't just morale boosters. They were instruments of a new kind of warfare, one that targeted the mind with surgical precision. General George C. Marshall, later architect of the European Recovery Program, famously understood that economic stability and psychological well-being were inseparable from national security. This perspective began to crystallize even before the war's end, as reports from the POW camps filtered back to Washington and London, painting a clear picture of an enemy whose will was breaking not just from bombs, but from bewildering abundance. This wasn't a one-off observation. It became a cornerstone of evolving Allied doctrine. The post-war era, particularly the nascent Cold War, saw the United States and its allies invest heavily in what would later be termed soft power, the idea that cultural exchange, economic aid, and the demonstration of a superior way of life could be as potent as military divisions began to take root. The very existence of organizations like the United States Information Agency, USIA, established in 1953, can be traced back to these wartime insights into the power of perception and the erosion of belief systems. They weren't just disseminating information, they were cultivating an alternative worldview, proving that a robust economy could be a more persuasive weapon than any tank division. Consider the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, launched in April 1948. On the surface, it was an economic aid package, pouring billions of dollars into rebuilding war-torn Europe. But beneath the financial aid lay a profound psychological strategy to demonstrate the tangible benefits of democracy and capitalism, contrasting sharply with the Soviet model of authoritarian control and economic hardship. The sight of American goods, infrastructure projects, and even cultural programs across Europe wasn't just about recovery. It was a potent, systemic refutation of communist propaganda, much like the German beer offered a stark counterpoint to Nazi ideology. This was the same principle, scaled up to an entire continent, proving that prosperity could be a powerful ideological counterargument. The lesson also underscored the critical importance of cultural intelligence. Understanding the specific symbols, aspirations, and vulnerabilities of an adversary became paramount. The early Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, founded in 1947, wasn't just focused on espionage and covert operations. A significant portion of its analytical capacity was dedicated to understanding foreign cultures, political ideologies, and social dynamics. This holistic approach to intelligence, moving beyond mere military capabilities, was a direct outgrowth of the wartime experience with psychological operations, where knowing what to offer, like German beer, was as crucial as how to deliver it. It was about leveraging nuanced understanding for strategic advantage, a quiet battle fought in the minds of populations. The Allies realized that preventing future global conflicts required more than just winning battles. It demanded winning the peace by addressing the root causes of ideological extremism and societal instability. The denazification efforts in Germany, while sometimes flawed in execution, were fundamentally aimed at a profound societal transformation, not just punishment. The psychological impact of seeing the victorious Americans not as vengeful conquerors, but as providers of basic comforts, even familiar cultural staples, subtly shifted perceptions. It laid the groundwork for a Germany that, within a few decades, would become a stable democratic ally, a testament to the long-term vision forged in the fires of war and refined by these subtle psychological tactics. These insights continue to resonate in contemporary conflicts, particularly in the realm of information warfare. Today, state and non-state actors alike invest heavily in shaping narratives, influencing public opinion, and discrediting adversaries through non-military means. The proliferation of digital media means that the battle for hearts and minds is fought daily across platforms, often using culturally resonant content to achieve strategic objectives. Whether it's the subtle promotion of specific values or the targeted dissemination of information, the fundamental principle remains. Demonstrating a contrasting reality can be far more effective than direct confrontation. The ghost of that imported German beer still haunts the strategic landscape, a silent testament to its enduring power. The ability to dismantle an adversary's worldview without firing a shot, to win a conceptual victory that underpins the physical one, redefined what total war truly meant. It wasn't just about overwhelming force, it was about overwhelming the very idea of the enemy's cause. This profound understanding of human psychology, leveraged with logistical genius, remains a cornerstone of modern strategic thinking, revealing the hidden power dynamics that often operate beneath the surface of overt conflict. This enduring legacy prompts a final crucial question. How did these lessons about psychological warfare and cultural leverage specifically impact American foreign policy and military engagement in the decades that followed, shaping the very definition of global leadership? The image of a bewildered German POW offered a familiar German beer by an American soldier isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It's a primal scene, a microcosm of a profound shift in strategic thought. It encapsulates the moment when the Allies, particularly the United States, began to truly grasp that victory wasn't merely about military might, but about the systematic dismantling of an adversary's worldview and the construction of a new reality. This realization became a foundational principle for American foreign policy, especially during the nascent years of the Cold War. It forged the understanding that global leadership wasn't solely about projecting military strength, but about demonstrating a compelling alternative, a superior way of life that could win allegiance without coercion. The Marshall Plan, cultural diplomacy initiatives, and extensive educational exchanges, these weren't merely benevolent gestures. They were direct descendants of the psychological warfare tactics refined in the POW camps, designed to win hearts and minds by showcasing abundance, freedom, and opportunity. America learned to leverage its economic prowess and cultural appeal as potent instruments of influence, shaping alliances and undermining ideological rivals not just through force, but through demonstration and persuasion. This era marked a profound evolution in how nations conceived of power, recognizing that a nation's capacity to inspire and provide could be as formidable as its capacity to destroy. It became about exporting a vision, a way of life, that was demonstrably superior to the alternatives. In an era dominated by information warfare, where narratives clash daily across digital battlefields, the lessons from 1945 are more relevant than ever. The subtle power of cultural resonance, the strategic value of understanding an adversary's psychology, and the enduring impact of tangible demonstrations of capability over mere rhetoric. These are the cornerstones of modern influence operations, from public diplomacy to countering extremist ideologies. The ghost of that imported German beer still whispers in the halls of strategic planning, a potent reminder that the most decisive victories are often won not on the physical battlefield, but in the minds of populations, by offering a reality that is simply undeniable. The enduring legacy of that simple imported beer is a testament to the truth that true strategic power lies in the ability to redefine reality itself. If this deep dive into the hidden currents of psychological warfare made sense to you, subscribe now to WW2 Beyond Battles so you don't miss our next exploration into the untold stories of history. Leave a like if you found this perspective insightful, letting us know these deeper analyses resonate. And tell me in the comments, what unexpected detail from this story truly turned the key in your understanding of total war? Your insights help shape our next journey.